We're back. This is Renovate and Build with Jim and Sandra, powered by Fair Trade Works.
If I had $1 million, I'd build a tree fort in our yard. If I had $1 million, you could help, it wouldn't be that hard.
What would you do with $1 million? Actually, I guess it's not as relevant as it used to be when that song first came out, because you need a lot more than $1 million these days. Good morning. Hope you're enjoying your Saturday morning. Great to have you along here on Renovate and Build.
Yes, good morning, and we're going to jump in right into our next guest we have on the phone all the way from Toronto. Peter Norman is his name, and he's the chief economist at Altus Group, and he's here to talk about our Canadian love affair with our homes. Good morning, Peter. Thanks for joining us here in the West.
Good morning. It's always my pleasure.
Peter, can you just give us an idea of how big the home and renovation and repair business really is in our country? I mean, recent statistics we were reading said Canadians spend more than $60 billion each year. Is this what your findings are indicating as well?
Yeah, certainly it's a very large and important sector to the Canadian economy and also to our local economies, et cetera. We might have a tendency to kind of dismiss it because we think about, we'll undertake a little project here and there on our homes, or we see our neighbors fixing up their porch or doing some landscape work or something, but we don't really think about the total magnitude of it. But it is a very important sector overall. Canada-wide, as you say, it's over $65 billion, which makes it above 3% of GDP. A very, very overall pretty important. There's thousands of men and women work in this industry in Canada, and I guess from a kind of from the perspective of an economist, as you're talking to, I think about it not just in terms of what people are spending their money on, in the same way as they might be going to the movies or any other kind of activity, but it's really an investment, right? So we think about it being capital investment. It's a pretty important component of our economy's investment in itself.
Yeah, it's huge. And Peter, do you think this is a little bit off context? But when I started Fair Trade Works, I believe there's a whole billion-dollar industry out there that is just waiting to kind of do some home improvements, renovation, and new construction, where they've maybe stepped into the construction marketplace and been kind of scared off by what's happening, or their first contact with the construction industry may have been not what they expected and kind of stepped back. And I really think there's a huge industry that's not even on the graph or on the charts, where that they're just waiting for a new kind of environment or a kind of a new system or something where they can feel protected and safe and feel comfortable in moving forward with a home construction project.
Well, there's certainly as you go from individual to individual or homeowner to homeowner or even property owner to property owner, you're going to get various experiences. Not everybody undertakes a renovation every year. Obviously, most people only take a major renovation on their homes, once or twice, in their lifetimes. Yeah. And but everyone's doing a little bit of work every single year, minor repairs, replacement of windows, and so on and so forth. But certainly for those major renovations, they will, for most homeowners, they will come along eventually. But as you say, some may be waiting for just the right moment to come along. That right moment might have to do with their own financing. It might have to do, as I think you were implying in your question, with the supply side.
Right.
A lot of people might look right now and say, well, it's pretty difficult to find a renovator because you call them up to come do the quotation and they tell you it might be, weeks before they can even start. So you get an impression that it might be pretty difficult to even get their time. But, you still have in the back of your mind that you want to undertake that project and you undertake it eventually. From our perspective, from a sort of a macro perspective, obviously, there are a lot of projects going on right now, and we're seeing it being more and more so every year, not just in the sense that, obviously there are more homes every year. I mean, we're building homes, so you got to renovate them eventually, but it's also that every single homeowner, on average, is spending more on repair and renovation each year over the last several years, and in particular, since about 10 years ago, we've seen a big rise.
Yeah, it's interesting. And why do you believe Canadians are opening their wallets even wider each year for the home renovations?
Well, I think there's a lot of sorts of things that are driving it right now. There's certainly a lot of, structural demographic factors that you might talk about. I mean, we have an aging population. People are, some renovations are, a lot of renovation activity is amongst sort of empty nesters who are transforming their homes into the sort of new stage of life that they find themselves in. We know a lot about the sort of baby boomers and the effect that they have on various markets. They have been affecting the renovation sector in the last several years and in years to come as well. So that's kind of an important thing. But there's other important economic factors as well. We have the low interest rate environment that we're familiar with right now. Interest rates have come down pretty significantly since 10 years ago and remain pretty low and steady. And that does have a pretty important influence on people's willingness to undertake a renovation project. I mean, not only does it help them borrow money if that's what they're choosing to do in order to undertake the project, and bear in mind, only about 1 in 4 actually borrows money, so it's not the major factor. But for those who do need to borrow, low interest rates obviously will help make that decision easier. But we see the low interest rates having an impact as well, because a lot of people who own homes and have owned them for quite a while had a mortgage on those homes, and the mortgage is coming up for renewal, and they go into the bank to renew their mortgage, and lo and behold, they're renewing at a lower mortgage rate, and they realize they've got some extra money left over, and that money often, the decision is to plow it back into the home in some way.
Peter, when do you think the biggest spending period is for homeowners? Like, is it for the younger couples with new homes spending more than those who have owned for a few years, like the empty nesters?
Oh, I think that's an excellent question, actually, because it's going to be a bit of a different experience as you go across the spectrum, and there's going to be different kinds of renovation. But one life event that we know creates a fair amount of renovation activity, and where a lot of that is coming from is around the resale housing transaction. So when a home gets sold through multiple listing service or some other service, a resale home, we know that the people who are selling that home tend to spend a fair amount of money immediately before listing the homes. We know from watching HGTV and other types of programs like that there's a lot of interest in fixing up a home for a sale. And then when the new owners come into that home, we know that they also spend an elevated amount of money in the first 2 or 3 years after they buy that home, making it their own. And so those buyers tend to be, as you're sort of saying, younger families who are just getting into their starter or their move-up home. So people, first-time buyers tend to be in their late 20s, early 30s. Move-up buyers tend to be in their sort of mid to late 40s. And so that's where you see a lot of that kind of activity. But as I implied earlier, there's also, the older demographic is starting to get onto the horizon pretty significantly here. And that's, as I say, kind of, the empty nester who is remaking their home. Mm-hmm. And in a few years' time, when baby boomers get into, when they get a little bit older, what we're going to see is a lot more activity on the mobility side, making homes more accessible once we get that bulge in the population running into their lower mobility years.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's interesting. And Peter, is one market hotter than the other, or right now are all the major city centres just continuing this kind of spending and love affair with their homes and renovating?
Well, certainly we see, even though we've talked about these kinds of structural factors and people selling and buying and aging and all that kind of stuff, even though we have those kind of structural factors that affect everywhere, it is important to remember that this kind of an activity continues to be a certain degree a discretionary activity, at least in terms of when you choose to do your renovation. Mm-hmm. And so given that it's discretionary, it's going to be once we take a bit of a higher view and look down onto various regions of the country, the pace with which renovation activity is rising or not is going to have a lot to do with the dynamics of the economy. So certainly regions of the country where the economy is going very strong right now, and I'm thinking about the prairies and also BC. And you get a lot of in-migration, you've got a lot of job growth, et cetera. That's where we have seen in the last couple of years the greatest increase in renovation activity as well. And for those regions of the country, like, for instance, Atlantic Canada right now, where the economy is quite slow, and Quebec as well, where we've had some speed bumps in terms of economic growth in the last couple of years, that's where we've seen lower growth in renovation activity. So where goes the Canadian economy, where goes the local economy in this country, tends to drive a lot of these types of decisions as well.
Yeah, it all makes sense. And like, how is the average homeowner paying for these renovations? Are they using their savings, financing? I know you just mentioned earlier about refinancing, and that kind of triggers as a catalyst to kind of think about home improvements. But you know, what's the average person? How are they kind of paying for these kind of upgrades?
Well, actually, surprisingly, only about a quarter of major renovation projects. Only about a quarter of the projects are being financed, like through a traditional means,
Right.
Either a bank loan or line of credit, and so on and so forth. So, a lot of it is being financed really by savings, by people who have saved up enough in order to make that renovation, and that's important. But for those who are financing it, we find that the majority, probably about half or a little more than half, are financing that in some way using their home equity. So either they refinance a mortgage, so you go to refinance you go to renew your mortgage, but you add an extra $50,000 onto the principal, and then you use that $50,000 for your renovation job, or you're using a secured line of credit, which is sort of effectively like a second mortgage, but you're still drawing that equity out of your home. So even for those who are financing, it's usually on financial instruments which are drawing equity out of the home, and then of course you're putting equity back in by doing the renovation.
Yeah, it creates a lot of stability. Okay, so yeah, Peter, thanks so much. It's extremely interesting, and we could listen to that for a long time to come. So hopefully we'll have you back. And again, thanks so much for joining us from the East Coast.
It's my pleasure, and thank you very much for talking about this important sector.
We've been speaking with Chief Economist Peter Norman from Altus Group. You can check out their website at altusgroup.com. That's ALTUS group.com. Or you can see their link on our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/renovateandbuild.
Well, Sandra, it's that time again. Time to get back to the office and back to construction. Lots of projects on the go, and we're going to hand over to Tom Lucas and Sherry Brown for Radio Real Estate, which is coming up next.
And I'd like to thank our producer, Dwayne Bishop, for his hard work today in putting this production together, along with the New Cap team for their assistance.
And next week on Renovate and Build, we'll be catching up with the latest construction and development news in Vancouver West with Tim Keacott. We'll be talking bathroom and kitchen fixtures with Mike Heaps at Wosley, Canada.
And if you're interested in rainwater harvesting, you won't want to miss our expert from Bar Plastics. And of course, Megan Gary will drop by with Fireplace Solutions. That's on Product Face Off next Saturday.
Over to Tom and Sherry at Radio Real Estate. Have a great weekend, everybody.
Introducing a revolutionary new construction system. This is Renovate and Build with Jim and Sandra.